An icy wind dances across a gray December landscape. The spirits and haints of forgotten Yuletide seasons long past return to us for a brief winter greeting. From the studio of Blackwater Media in the great city of Atlanta, I'm Dr. William Lester. Welcome to Blackwater Media's A Creepy Christmas, Anthology 5. The schedule is always the same. At 5 p.m. we eat dinner. At 6 we put on our pajamas and watch It's a Wonderful Life. Then at 8:30, Mom makes us take sleeping pills, and we have to go to bed because we, quote, can't be awake when Santa comes. It's bullshit. None of my friends' families do crazy shit like this. I'm 17 this year, and I stopped believing in Santa Claus years ago. So, last Christmas Eve, when my mom was handing out our pills, I hid mine under my tongue and thought about spitting it out in the toilet. But something told me not to. Anyway, I pretended to be extra sleepy and went to bed. Only I wasn't tired. I was wide awake and ready to stay up to figure out what my parents do on Christmas Eve that they don't want us to know about. So I was curled up under my covers when I heard something weird outside. I'd never heard anything like it before, so I went to my window and peeked out. What I saw scared me so goddamn much that I gasped, and the little white pill went right down my throat. I needed them to work fast. I had to get to sleep right away. My whole family was asleep, and now I knew that I should have been too. I don't know what the hell those big red spider-looking things were on the Pearsons' roof, but the ones that went down to the Andersons' house pulled their daughter out the chimney. People aren't supposed to be in chimneys. Never mind go up them. I'll never forget the way she screamed. I started to get a little drowsy, but I could hear the weird clicking sound they make on the roof. It sounds like little hooves, but those goddamn things weren't reindeer. I think they only take people that are awake. Now I know why my parents wanted us asleep. Good night to you all. And if you find that you aren't able to sleep after hearing this story, at least do your best to have a creepy Christmas. I'm 18 years old and just started my freshman year at Florida State. But my paranormal incident occurred at my parents' house this past Christmas. I decided to stay in a school dorm simply to get away from that damn house. My parents and I, and by the way, I'm the youngest of 4 kids and the only one still living at home. Well, we moved into a plantation-style house in Mobile, Alabama about 2 years ago. The house itself is enormous. It used to sit on a fairly large plot of land before being developed into condos a small distance away. Also, there used to be a barn and a guest house on the property, but they're long gone. I always had an uneasy feeling living there. And to contribute to that feeling of weirdness, all the rooms in the house were large, open, and had high ceilings. And one night, something pretty damn scary happened. It was about 10 o'clock, and I was home alone. I was lounging on one of the big leather couches, flipping through the channels on the TV while occasionally dozing off. There were 2 lamps on in the room, one directly behind me and one across the room beside the smaller couch. As I lay there with my eyes trained on the TV, I noticed something shift in the corner of my vision. I'd assumed it was a fly and didn't look right away, until it moved again. So I turned my head to the left and watched in amazement at some sort of shadow that seemed to have long, curled fingers, which reminded me a lot of one of the amoebas that I'd learned about in biology class. Well, those fingers stretched from beneath the lamp, over the side of the couch, and onto the floor in front of me. As the shadow moved, it grew in mass, yet there was nothing in the room that could cast such a shadow. The fat finger splayed across the floor and crept closer and closer to where I was sitting. There was no sound except the background noise of the TV, and absolutely no object that could create such a shadow. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired and seeing things, but the shadow was still there when I opened my eyes, and it was closer. Curiosity was rapidly turning into fear as the thing grew even larger and practically covered the entire goddamn floor. I knew I had to act quickly before I let whatever this thing was touch me. So I jumped from the couch and zipped across the room to a carpeted patch that didn't have the shadow on it. And it even sounds bizarre as I'm saying this, but it's true. I ran down the hall, up the stairs, and to my room where I stayed the rest of the damn night. No big massive shadows crept into my room that night, at least not while I was awake. The next day, I told my mom about it. And she didn't look at me like I was crazy. She had a strange expression on her face, almost like she was remembering something, and she nodded her head as I recounted my story, which leads me to believe something happened to her. I wish she'd tell me what it was. Anyway, that's my story. And as we go through this Yuletide season, I wish each and every one of you a creepy Christmas. We all know that magical feeling when you're 6 or hell even 13 years old on Christmas Day. Anything is possible when you run into your living room and see that brightly lit Christmas tree with presents stacked underneath it. The colorful designs of the wrapping paper seem so alluring and make you giggle with glee. And you know what? You believe that anything can be under all those layers of wrapping paper just waiting for you to discover. Well, my Christmas story is a kind of experience like that, but different than any other 7-year-old. Normally, when you open a present on Christmas Day, you expect to find something happy or positive. What I found is impossible for me to explain, even today, now in my late 20s. I can't begin to comprehend it. I woke up earlier than usual, about 8 o'clock. I ran down the stairs in my Christmas pajamas. My dad and mom were sitting on the couch, mugs of coffee in their hands, smiling up at me. The radio was playing Christmas music like it does every year in my small town. On the kitchen counter waiting for me was a freshly baked pan of gingerbread cookies and milk. Oh my God, just like the perfect Christmas. There was one thing, however, one thing that was different. There was a small box under the tree, roughly about the size of a box of pencils, with the same appearance. The present was not wrapped in the same coloring wrapping paper, which made me curious. Being 7 years old, I thought it was simply a, quote, special present, different from the rest, and probably better. I wonder what's in this one, I said, picking up the small box. My parents, though, didn't seem to recognize the present, almost as if they had absolutely no idea how it got underneath the tree. I rolled my eyes at them, believing that they were just pretending not to know what it was to maintain some sort of element of surprise. I took the box and peeled off the wrapping paper. but there wasn't a present in there. There was a cardboard box with my address written on it. It was like just a package. Now, I'm not talking about a package like you would see from Amazon or anything. It was a package sent to me from an unidentified individual. Oddly enough, there was no return address anywhere on the package, which gave me no clue as to who sent it to me. There were, however, in dark red pen, the initials NP scrawled on the front in signature format. And I was genuinely confused at this point, as were my parents. So I took a pair of scissors and cut through the tape that sealed the sides of the box and opened it. Inside the box was a letter. Not the sort of letter that you would expect to come in the mail. There was no envelope. It was a traditional letter, with the paper folded neatly in half, a wax stamp seal keeping the letter closed. I broke the seal and opened the letter, and it read, "Dear Timothy Anderson, I watch you when you're sleeping. I know when you're awake. Go to sleep tonight, Timmy. And please, please do not wake up for your own sake. Happy holidays, S.C." I read the letter several times trying to grasp any sort of meaning in it, but I didn't realize something until later. I looked at the bottom of the letter, and attached to it by a small piece of tape was a small razor blade. I didn't go to sleep that night. I was hysterical. My mom and dad had to stay awake with me that night and play games with me, try to get me to calm down in any way that they possibly could. The anticipation, the excitement of tearing open a gift on Christmas morning took on a whole new horrific meaning. Now, as years have gone by, I look at Christmas in a completely different way. So think about that as you look forward to gathering together with friends, family, and loved ones, and wondering about those packages and bags and other surprises under the tree. And I also hope that you all have a creepy Christmas. For as long as I can remember, I've had the feeling that something was watching me. But this is the first time anything has ever tried to hurt me. I've lived in this house since I was born, and my sister and I have always gotten weird feelings in my room. When we were younger, we kept all the toys in my room, and we'd play in hers. We'd walk to my room to get toys and get strange feelings and run back to her room. I always thought it was just our imagination. But last year, just a few days before Christmas, the real terror started. It was late and I couldn't sleep. Maybe I was excited about the holidays. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, I had 3 thin scratches. They weren't made by fingernails. They were too close together and too thin. They almost looked like they came from a cat. And this would be normal if there was some kind of animal in the house, but we don't own any pets. I have heard that 3 scratches mean a demonic presence. And I don't know what to do. I told my parents my concerns, but they just dismissed me and treated me like I was just making too much out of nothing. When I had friends over, almost every one of them told me later that my room gave them weird feelings. I know that there's something there, and I can't do anything about it. I even asked my parents if I could burn sage or splash holy water in my room, and they would just say no. What could it hurt? I've done research about this, and everything I've seen says that it's a demonic presence. I've looked at pictures of demonic scratches from actual cases dealing with demons, and they all look exactly like mine. I'm scared of that house. It's not my imagination or desire for attention. I mean, think about it. The growls and demonic voices, plus the scratches. The shit would terrify anybody. I know there's something in that house, and I know it's pure evil. Please, somebody help me. I don't know what to do.
The Tarleton Twosome, perfect choice for Christmas giving. Filter-tip Tarleton and a Christmas carton printed with English holly and a big green ribbon. So smart it needs no other wrapping. What a gift for filter smokers. All the pleasure comes through. The taste is great. And for your friends who prefer a non-filter cigarette, choose famous Herbert Tarleton in a Christmas carton printed with holly and a bright red ribbon. Remember the Tarleton Twosome, perfect choice for Christmas giving.
Miss Henrietta Jackson was 83 years old and lived by herself, and her cat, of course. Her husband had passed 2 years prior, and her children had since grown up and left the nest. But come Christmas time, Miss Jackson got her joy whenever her grandchildren paid a visit. She thought of the looks on their faces whenever she served them Christmas cookies and other pleasantries. This Christmas, she made some sweet and salty toffee and kept it on the kitchen table. She found herself sitting down in her favorite chair, knitting a scarf, when there came a sharp knock on the door. She jumped a bit, not expecting any visitors at that hour. "Can we come in?" In a rather tentative manner, the old lady laid down the scarf on the arm of the sofa and gripped the chair. Her frail bones popped and shifted. Getting up from the chair, she collected her walking stick and trudged rigidly towards the front door. Another sharp knock rung out, that time more agitated than previously. "I'm coming, hold on," she yelled. She grasped the doorknob and turned it counterclockwise. The door creaked open. On the other side of the door were 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy appeared older, presumably around 13. He wore a denim hoodie and gray pants. He was holding the hand of an 8-year-old girl who was wearing a blue dress with white lace. For whatever reason, the children had their heads bowed, looking at their feet. The boy repeated his question. "Can we come in?" Miss Jackson scratched her head. It was 10 o'clock at night. Why would these children be at her house at that time of night? Somehow the boy must have realized what she was thinking. "We need to borrow your phone. My cell phone battery's dead." She thought more about the suddenness of having these unexpected guests. But they were children regardless. At the very least, she could grant them this one request. She nodded her head, gesturing the 2 children in. She directed them into the living room where her cat woke up from the ruckus. When it set its eyes on the 2 mysterious children, the cat arched its back and hissed. Miss Jackson walked over to silence her cat. "Lex," she said, "these are our guests. Behave yourself." The cat mewed in defeat before running out of the living room and into the kitchen. The 2 children sat on the sofa, their eyes still hidden. Miss Jackson went into the kitchen and pulled out a plate of sweet and salty bark. She returned to the living room and bent down to the children's eye level. "Care for some sweets?" The boy looked up. There was a good reason as to why he was shielding his eyes. They were devoid of color or pupils. Nothing more than pitch-black nothingness. Whatever he was, he assuredly was not of this earthly realm. The girl looked up as well, and her eyes matched the cold blackness of the older boy. Although she thought it bizarre, the old lady simply smiled at the children, despite the hollow sockets that they called eyes. The children were speechless at first. They shared a puzzled glare. The girl waved her hand in front of Miss Jackson's face, but her eyes didn't follow the path of it. They leaned in closer, realizing that Miss Jackson's eyes were glazed over in a thin sheet of blue. She was blind. The old lady suddenly frowned. "Oh, I'm sorry. You don't care for them? Thank you, the boy said. He took a piece of the sweet and salty bark and broke it in his hand before passing the girl a piece. Their heavy teeth ground down on the sweets. Oddness aside, the two children couldn't help but bask in the sweetness and saltiness of the snack. They indulged themselves in more of the sweets before getting up. They looked at the decorations with curiosity. On top of the fireplace on a stand was a small replica of the nativity scene. From her mental notes, she figured out that the two children had stopped at the fireplace. "Isn't it such a lovely display?" she asked. "Do you know the story of Christmas?" "We know about your Jesus," the boy responded. "Our ancestors spoke a lot about him." Confused by his statement, Miss Jackson nevertheless allowed the two children to further marvel at the Christmas decorations. The girl rustled the Christmas tree, causing the ornaments to fall to the floor. She ceased when she sensed the old lady getting upset. The two children played with the nutcrackers and listened to Christmas songs. The hours edged by slowly until a sudden electrical surge generated through the house. The two children looked at each other and back at Miss Jackson. "We have to go now. Our parents are here." A bright light shone through the windows. Outside was a spherical, smooth craft standing on 3 legs. A large, skinny-looking creature exited the craft and stood there at the door. The two children collected the plate of sweet and salty bark and exited through the front door. There came a sound of a large whistle as if there were 1,000 steam engines situated outside. Within a flash, the craft was gone, and Miss Jackson called out for the two children, only to be met by a great silence. And she closed the door and returned to her knitting. Without question, that year, Mrs. Henrietta Jackson had a creepy Christmas. And I hope that you have one too.
All right, everybody now in the family key, please.
My grandpa was one hell of a storyteller. I mean, I know that most grandfathers are. It kind of goes along with the whole idea of being older, wiser, and full of the kind of life experiences that go into making and telling endless, wild, funny, bizarre tales of days gone by. I remember that listening to those stories added to the euphoric, dizzying haze of summer afternoons sitting out on the screened-in front porch. It deepened the creepy but exciting sensations of cool October evenings that seemed to pile onto the enjoyment of an approaching Halloween. And oh my God, Thanksgivings, and especially Christmases, became high seasons for celebrating the fabled retelling of some of my grandfather's most harrowing exploits of the past. Of course, as we listened to the stories, we all knew that for the most part, these were at best tall tales, wild flights of fancy, with just enough truth sprinkled in to allow for at least the veneer of legitimacy. But I remember one Christmas, a Christmas that as an adult sticks out in my mind a little bit more than most, when the story that he told us brought out a very different kind of look on his face. As I grew up, the story had all but faded into the back lot in exchange for a predictable boyhood jungle of baseball, video games, movies, and cars. It's funny how the years can pile up on you and go by almost without being counted. Like I said, as an adult, I can remember that year or that Christmas quite clearly, as if someone had revealed to me an old, half-yellowed photograph from a dusty family album that had been all but forgotten. Anyway, my grandfather said that he wanted to tell us about something that happened to him, or rather something that he'd seen a long time ago that most people would consider too outrageous to believe. He said it was in January of 1940, and that he was then 29 years old. It was, he said, the beginning of a strange year full of signs and omens that to the observant were difficult to miss. Although he lived in the city, in those days his favorite fishing spots and hunting grounds were never more than a 20-minute drive away. He made mention of the fact that the presence of deer had seemed to dwindle down to almost nothing. Back then, the bear population was higher than it is these days, but he knew that it couldn't account for the drastic absence of deer. Then there was the snow. Yes, it was not that unusual in January and February to see a little snow, usually a modest dusting and less often perhaps an inch or two every 5 or 6 years. After all, it was Georgia, and snowfall of any great significance was for the most part a novelty. But before that January was out, my grandfather said more than 8 inches of snow would fall. One cold January day he said that he'd driven over to visit one of his buddies, Bill Donovan, whom everybody referred to as Donnie. They'd known each other since high school, and they'd spent many a day out hunting rabbit and deer and fishing in the numerous nearby lakes and ponds. When he got to Donnie's house, he got out, went to the front door and knocked, and got no answer. He thought that was strange. It was getting dark, and it was unusual at that time of day for no one to be there. He started to turn around and get back into his truck, and then it occurred to him to go around back and check. They had a raised, closed-in patio with a large window that looked out over their backyard. During the fall and winter, they often would be there under the warmth of a wood-burning stove, sipping coffee, reading newspapers and magazines, and listening to the radio. When he got around back, he could hear the sound of music on the radio as he went in. He saw his friend there with his back to him, standing and looking out the window. Then he noticed the rifle leaning in the corner by the window. Then my grandfather called out to him, "Donnie, what the hell's going on?" When Donnie turned around, my grandfather said that he had a strange look on his face, a look that he had never seen before from his friend. And he asked what was wrong, and where Beverly was. That was his wife. Donnie was silent for another few moments, then looked up and said, "What? Beverly? She's down at the Clearys. Her and Helen are working on a new quilt." My grandfather responded, "Okay, then what is it? What's wrong?" "There was a thing down there in the yard, over by that tree." He pointed to a small pine tree to our left and close to the fence. Then my grandfather asked him, "A thing? What kind of a thing?" "I don't know. I don't know what the hell it was. It was like a wolf, a big goddamn wolf. I mean, this thing was 3.5, 4 feet at the hip easy. I've never seen anything like it." Naturally, my grandfather asked him for more details. "What else? Tell me more about how it looked." "Well, shit. It had pitch black fur, long snout, pointed ears, and its eyes, man, its fucking eyes were like orange, and the size of a flashlight lens." When my grandfather got to this part of the story, I realized how big most flashlight lenses were in the 40s. The fact that Donnie compared that to the creature's eyes scared the fire pit shit out of me. Then Donnie said he got his rifle, went around to the top of the stairs, and got the creature in his sights. Then he said at that exact moment the creature reared up on its back feet and took its front feet to grab onto the tree and stood up on 2 legs. Aside from the shock of seeing a huge wolf stand up on 2 legs, he said that he could see that its front paws weren't really paws at all, but hands. Hands with fingers that could spread out like a person's to hold onto the tree. He also said that at the distance he was from the creature, that it was a fairly easy shot. But he said something in his head made him hesitate. It was 4 words registering in his mind. "Don't pull the trigger." And then the wolf thing looked up and directly at him, and for a moment their eyes locked, and as sunset continued to give way to darkness, the creature cleared the fence, fell back down onto 4 legs, and vanished into the cold night. Then Donnie said, "Come with me, let me show you something." So the 2 of them went down the stairs into the backyard, and walked over to the tree where the creature had been. Donnie used his rifle to indicate on the tree how tall the wolf creature was when it stood up on two legs. My grandfather was like, "Shit, that would make the damn thing almost 8 feet tall." The two men stood there for a few moments just staring at each other, shaking their heads. My grandfather said that he and Donnie scouted around the area a number of times after that, but they never saw the wolf thing. They did find some large tracks down by a nearby creek, tracks they were both sure were made by the creature. That was, of course, 80 years ago. The werewolf was yet to become the horror film genre fixture that it would be in subsequent years, and way back then, nobody used the term dogman. But I'm sure that was the creature that made an appearance that day. Sadly, both men are now long gone, but their story lives on. And oh, by the way, I hope that while you're listening to this story, that you and yours have a creepy Christmas. The cold wind blew the snow around the wild December air. Winter, it seemed, had finally come to the village of Hanover in the district of Belthorn. It was the same every year. The little town, situated and nestled into a small valley in the Adelgeese Mountains, always had December snow. It was a charming village, and frequented by travelers from surrounding districts and regions, sometimes from as far away as Westland, who wished to experience the Yuletide season in the picturesque surroundings of Hanover. Visitors were always impressed, too, when they looked up into the mountains and saw the majestic Castle Calmude. They shouldn't have been, though, for within was the source of their doom. This year would be no different. There was only one hotel in the village, the Hanover Royale. During the Christmas season, nearly, if not all of its 20 rooms would be filled. There would be music, dancing, singing, and feasting on roasted pepper chicken and fried capish, a fish that had long been a local delicacy and pulled from the waters of the Sagern River. But on Christmas Eve, the festive spirit gave way to horror and pure evil. On that night each year, the hotel owner would leave just before midnight, leaving all points of entry unlocked. And as the guests of the Hanover Royale slept, the occupants of Castle Calmude descended from their mountain keep down into the village, and through necessitated invitation, into the hotel. Once inside, it was nothing less than slaughter. The screams of the hapless victims were deadened by the frigid night air. The vampires mangled, ripped, mauled each and every one of them, and then gorged themselves in an unholy Yuletide feast of blood. When the sun rose on Christmas morning, the church bells in the village square rang out, and the undead of Calmude Castle slept silently, insatiated in their coffins. Both of these were local traditions. The doors and windows of the Hanover Royale had been boarded up overnight, and the old building sat quietly beneath the blanketing snow. In a few weeks, or maybe less, it would reopen, and things would go on as if the horror of December 24th had never happened. It had to be that way. It was an agreement, a contract between the people of Hanover and the Calmudes. Once a year on Christmas Eve, the visiting hotel guests would be sacrificed in exchange for the villagers going untouched, and a small pouch filled with 20 gold coins left at each doorstep in the village. Friends and loved ones gathered, exchanged gifts, dined heartily, sang old songs, and sipped brandy. And indeed, for every man, woman, and child in the village of Hanover, it was a very, Merry Christmas. In the spirit of the holiday season, I have something of a confession to make. Now, when I tell you, a lot of you will just think that I must be some kind of weirdo at best, just looking for attention with a nutty story that can't possibly be true. Others of you will assume that I probably have a screw loose and should probably be under the supervision of some dark and infamous state-run mental hospital, typically in a building almost 100 years old. But I am none of those things. I'm as sane as any man can be in this world that we live in. You see, this time of year, most folks are either visiting friends or relatives, or they have friends or relatives visiting them. In my case, I am host. But the one major difference is that all of my guests are dead. Yes, you heard me correctly. Each year at this time, my home is filled with ghostly visitors as my guests for the holidays. Now, it is true that I live in a large old house in an old section of town, and no doubt the house, the land, and even the surrounding area has seen more than its share of history. So each year on the day after Thanksgiving, I head up to the attic and start bringing down the Christmas decorations. And that's usually when the first of the guests start to arrive. I see them in varying shades of clarity. Sometimes, for brief moments, they appear to be completely solid, as living people do. Mostly, though, they come and go as flickering remnants of what was, like the grainy black and white images of an old silent film. I've noticed also that my guests are from different eras, ranging from hippies in beads and sandals, servicemen from the Second World War, those who were enslaved and those free of such bondage, to 50s hipsters, antebellum ladies, and Native American shamans. Of course, that's just a brief cross-section of my holiday guests over the years. All through the holiday season, I play traditional Christmas music on the stereo during the day and well into the evening, and everyone seems to enjoy it. Of course, many of my visitors look on in curiosity while I'm watching football on TV, since many of them lived and died long before the advent of television. They seem to enjoy the Christmas tree a great deal, and again, for some, the fascination of the electric lights is surreal at times, but still amusing to see. Sometimes during the night when I'm laying in bed, I can hear them downstairs, telling stories of days long gone, and an occasional laugh will rise and linger through the hallways. It's like that all through the holidays. And then on New Year's Eve, as the clock strikes midnight and one year passes to the next, I can see them stirring in preparation for departure. Some of them fade through the front door, others through the kitchen, and some simply disappear through a wall. Then the house is quiet. Life, such as it is, returns to normal. The days come and go, turning into weeks and then months. The changing of the seasons, winter into spring, spring into summer, and then into fall. And I know that on the day after Thanksgiving, I will once again return to the attic to start bringing down Christmas decorations in anticipation of my guests for the holidays. And as you enjoy this Yuletide season, I wish you and yours a creepy Christmas.
Holiday greetings from Budweiser. family to yours, we wish you a very safe and happy holiday season.
Creek Valley, Georgia at the turn of the 20th century was a small rural town. To tell the truth, it still is. But in 1899, its life's blood was agriculture and logging. Again, for the most part, it still is. Onions, tomatoes, sweet corn, and bell peppers, as well as tall, strong pine and oak, all sustain the lives of the people of Creek Valley and the outskirt villages. But on Christmas Eve of that year, no one in Creek Valley was thinking about sweet corn or pine trees, nor were they necessarily caught up in the festive spirit of the season. No. Normally there would be parties. There would be a festival all up and down Charlotte Street with fireworks, singing, children laughing, and candles burning in every window. Not this Christmas Eve. Not after Harlan Crenshaw had been found out behind his barn in September, with his throat torn away and savage animal-type bite marks all over his body. Not after Jenny Weller, only 17 years old, had been discovered in late October, disemboweled and violated even beyond what can be spoken of here, close to the east side of Whitman's Bridge. Not after the Wilcrest family, 5 in all, mother, father, 2 boys aged 12 and 8, and a girl aged 6, had all been mutilated in their own home as they gathered at the table for Thanksgiving dinner. The killer had been monstrously powerful and had apparently shattered and splintered the heavy oak door to enter the house and slaughter the family. No, this Christmas Eve was different. It was finally time for the hunter to become the hunted. Siler Gresham led the men into the woods, hunting dogs and all. They entered the forest at nightfall, and a frigid rain began to fall. Overhead, a full December moon was barely visible behind the winter storm clouds. The creature could be heard howling fiendishly deep in the dense Georgia forest, but the men pursued it. The men with lanterns lit and dogs on the scent pursued the murderous man-wolf through the cold, pouring rain. The madness came to a head at Cherokee Bluff, where a rock outcropping hung over a 40-foot drop down into Pine Forge Creek. The man-beast snarled and growled in bestial spite. Beneath the black sky and cold rain, the dogs rushed in. The men opened fire. 6 or 8 of the bullets, all cast in silver, hit their target. There was a monstrous scream of pain and terror. The creature was thrown back, falling beyond the rocks and into the frigid waters of the creek. The men made their way off to the left for an easier descent down to where the thing lay. Even in the winter darkness, the light of their lanterns revealed one final horror. Laying there in a foot of water, with blood pouring out into the flow of the creek, was not the snarling beast from only minutes before, but the stranger who had drifted into town some months ago. There was disagreement over what his name was. Some thought it was Jackson. Others swore that it was Simmons. But whatever the case, he, or it, was dead. They pulled the body from the water and buried it deeper off into the woods. The men returned to their homes and families and apprised them as to what had happened. It seemed as though the nightmare was over. For the first time in months, the people of Creek Valley slept soundly. After all, it was Christmas Eve. The following is a set of instructions on how to perform the Snowman Ritual. This is a peace and prosperity ritual to be performed during the winter months in order to obtain favor and protection throughout the coming year, and will take 3 days to complete fully. The earliest written accounts of this ritual date back to the 4th century CE in Greater Scythia, now Ukraine and southernmost Russia. This translation has adapted the original materials used and the wording of the incantations to be more accessible for modern societies. Despite these changes, recent attempts suggest that the correctly performed rite is still very effective. Tradition dictates that this ritual be performed in the days between Christmas Eve, or the winter solstice, and New Year's Day. But in theory, it should be effective during any cold period where there is sufficient snowfall. This ritual works best for farmers and homeowners who keep livestock and/or pets. Urban apartment dwellers can attempt it, but will have a much harder time ensuring that the ritual is not interrupted or disturbed during the 3-day duration. One warning: for your own safety, please listen to the entire process before attempting this ritual. You will need the following: snow coverage of at least 3 inches, with temperatures near or below freezing over a 3-day period. 2 tree branches or wooden sticks, preferably forked at one end. String or rubber bands. Plant materials such as dead leaves or dried grass. Vegetable oil such as canola or olive oil. Animal material such as a strip of leather, clump of fur, cluster of feathers, etc. Animal blood, such as cow or pig's blood. This can be purchased at your local butcher or supermarket. Scissors, a sterilized needle, a lock of your hair, and a drop of your blood. Procedurally, at the edge of your property, build a snowman. It must be at least as tall as you are, so be sure to set aside the time and energy necessary, or enlist family or friends to help you. Ensure that the front of the snowman is facing away from your house. Use the tree branches on either side to form the snowman's arms. But do not give it a face. That will come later. At sundown, take the plant material, the vegetable oil, and the string or rubber bands out to the snowman. Facing the snowman, you should be looking at your house over its shoulder. Secure the plant materials to its left hand, your right hand, with the string or rubber bands. Dip your finger into the vegetable oil and press the finger into its left side of the face, your right side. This is the snowman's left eye. As you do this, recite the following: Snowman, snowman, see my land, hallowed soil on which we stand. Snowman, snowman, bless my home, guide me back if I ever roam. Afterwards, return to your house, lock the door, draw the curtains, and go to bed before midnight. If you wake in the night and hear a shuffling noise in the snow, do not open your curtains. The snowman is moving about, judging if your land and home are worthy. If, when you awake in the morning and the snowman has returned to its original position, congratulations. Your land and home will be safe for the next year, and you will be sure to return from any long journey you take. If you wake in the morning and the snowman is on a different part of your land, take heed of it. Whatever it is near will be affected by some calamity within the following year. If when you awake in the morning and the snowman has not melted, but is gone, I suggest that you move. The next day at sundown, take the animal material, the animal blood, and the string or rubber bands out of the snowman. Facing the snowman, secure the animal materials in its right hand with the string or rubber bands. Dip your finger into the blood and press the finger into its right side of the face. This is the snowman's right eye. As you do this, recite the following. Snowman, snowman, see my herd, pet and cattle, fish and bird. Snowman, snowman, bless my flock, grow them grass from thorn and rock. Afterwards, return to your house, lock the door, draw the curtains, and go to bed before midnight. If you wake in the night and hear shuffling in your house, do not open your bedroom door. The snowman is moving about, judging if the animals in your care are worthy. If when you awake in the morning and the snowman has returned to its original position, congratulations. Your pets will be healthy for the next year, and any livestock you own will thrive. If you awake in the morning and there is an inexplicable puddle of water near something your pet owns, like your dog's bed or your bird's cage, take heed of it. You should probably look into pet insurance for the next year. If when you awake in the morning and the snow has not melted, but the snowman is gone, say your goodbyes to them while you can. And I am so very sorry. The next day at sundown, take the scissors and the needle out of the snowman. Facing the snowman, use the needle to draw a drop of blood from your fingertip and draw it in a straight line across the snowman's face, forming a groove in the snow. This is the snowman's mouth. Using the scissors, clip a lock of your hair and stuff it into the groove of its mouth, ensuring that the hair does not fall out. As you do this, recite the following. Snowman, snowman, see my breath, drawing ever unto death. Snowman, snowman, bless my heart, judge me whole, and hence depart. Afterwards, return to your house, lock the door, draw the curtains, and go to bed before midnight. If you awake in the night and feel a cold, dark presence in your bedroom, do not open your eyes. The snowman is standing over you, judging if your soul is worthy. If you wake up in the morning, congratulations. The snowman will have returned to its original position, having judged you worthy. You can expect good health and good fortune in the following year. Another word of warning. To date, there are no surviving accounts of what happens to someone who is judged unworthy. Take from that what you will. The next day before sundown, preferably when the sun is highest, go over to the snowman, approach it only from behind. Do not walk around to face it. Demolish the snowman completely. Break the tree branches as many times as possible and scatter the snow around the yard as evenly as you can. Make sure that no trace of it remains, and say absolutely nothing. Once the snowman is demolished, the ritual is complete. Enjoy your year of peace and prosperity. Use it well, for when the days grow short and your luck runs thin, you may find yourself looking anxiously for the next steep snowfall. If so, I pray that the snowman may judge you whole this year and every year after. And I also wish you all a very creepy Christmas. Last year, I found a really cool ornament in a clearance box. It had a built-in camera to record a unique perspective on your holiday celebrations. I grabbed the last one from the store's dusty shelf and brought it home for less than $10. I forgot about it until my wife, my 2 daughters, and I decorated the house earlier this month. I told my daughters about the camera and said we'd secretly catch Santa in the act. I had an old Santa Claus costume in the attic, and I intended to deliver some gifts in full view of the camera. Now, of course, my girls were overjoyed and went back and forth trying to find the best place to put the ornament on the tree. They had no idea that Daddy repositioned it later, so we could actually catch the living room at a good angle. In the nights leading up to Christmas, I turned the camera on to make sure everything was working properly. In the morning, I previewed the footage, just long enough to confirm the thing was working. Satisfied, I inserted the micro SD card back into the ornament and slipped in a new battery in anticipation for the big night. After all, Daddy didn't want to disappoint his girls with a failed recording. We enjoyed Christmas Eve as a family, playing board games and eating way more junk food than there was room in our stomachs. Like we do every year, we let our daughters open one gift from Mommy and Daddy before going to bed. The girls, still riding their sugar high, could be heard giggling in their bedrooms from all the way up the stairs. From time to time, my wife and I could hear one of them shush the other, claiming she'd heard hoofs on the roof or bells jingling. Eventually, our kiddos dozed off. My wife kissed me on the cheek and headed to bed while I turned off all the lights. I retrieved the costume and tiptoed to the living room, getting ready for my big feature film debut. Now, I did everything you would expect Santa to do. I ate most of the cookies, I drank the milk, I pet my large stomach and said my ho-ho-hos, and I dropped a few presents by the fireplace, all in full view of the camera. A pretty good acting job, if I do say so myself. On Christmas morning, the girls came running into our bedroom to wake us up. They excitedly insisted that we watch the video before opening the presents. I transferred the footage to my laptop, forwarded it to where Santa showed up, and pressed play. My girls squealed with delight and jumped in front of the screen, frantically waving at Santa while obscuring the video from my view. It brought me so much joy to see how happy the girls were. I was too lazy to stop the video, so it continued to play in the background while we unwrapped our gifts. I spotted a box I had not seen the night before. It looked to be a small box and wrapped in blue foil paper, and I didn't recognize the wrapping paper either. My name was on it, but my wife seemed as surprised as I was to see it there. Noticing my confusion, my youngest daughter spoke. "Daddy, that's got to be from Mr. Elf," she said, her voice very cheerful and bright. And I was ready to dismiss her elf comment as just another weird things kids say, but my wife wasn't so quick to ignore it. "Honey, what elf?" she asked. My daughter pointed to the laptop. By then the video had ended, and all that was left on the screen was a preview of the first frame. "The one that came with Santa," she answered. Panic struck me like a bird in a jet propeller. I know my wife didn't dress up as an elf. I scanned the video, clicking forward and back until I saw what my daughter had seen. There was someone in the living room. He walked into the corner after I'd turned the lights off. He stood there watching me parading around as Santa. The video went completely quiet after that. It was as though the camera failed to record a single sound. The strange, tall man in an elf costume stood perfectly still for over an hour, watching the camera from a distance. After a while, he walked over to the plate of cookies and bit the head off a gingerbread man. I glanced at the plate and saw his teeth mark on the decapitated cookie. The man then quietly approached the Christmas tree. I thought the audio wasn't working, but as he reached the tree, I began hearing his slow and steady breath. He reached towards the ornament, and the video stopped. In a terrified frenzy, I grabbed the blue box he'd left behind. I ripped the bow off of it and tossed the frilly thing away. I frantically removed the wrapping paper, opened the box, and looked inside. There, on a bed of bubble wrap, was the battery I'd put in the camera the night before. My wife took the ornament and opened the back, and the battery was missing. I don't know what scares me more, what the camera caught or what the elf might have done after he turned off the camera. but you can be sure that it all made for a very creepy Christmas.
It's holiday time, and Beauregard cries, "Hey, look, there's a snowman ringing our doorbell." And Elsie says, "That's no snowman. It's Elmer with a surprise. Borden's Eggnog, the extra special holiday drink. Borden's, very big on flavor."
Wow, Borden's Eggnog. Now we can have a party.
Borden's Eggnog is the delicious holiday treat the whole family loves, right from the carton. It's made with lots of eggs, milk, and real sweet cream. Rich and creamy, better than the best milkshake you ever tasted. Borden's, very big on flavor. This is the only time of year you can get it, so ask Mom for Borden's Eggnog today.
So by Borden's, very big on flavor.
I love visiting my grandma. She always makes the food that I like, and in large quantities, and spoils me. With the hustle and bustle of college life, it's nice to go back to my childhood and allow myself to be spoiled for a few hours every few weeks. Even though she has 6 grandchildren, she made it clear that I'm her absolute favorite. She'd often have the whole family around for dinner, and after they left, she'd bring out the good stuff she made just for me. We usually have a big Christmas dinner together with the whole family. However, as the years go by and the younger ones start growing up, fewer and fewer people show up. Last year, everyone had already made plans, forgetting about poor Grandma. Now, I don't blame them, but they often forget how these visits mean a lot to her, especially ever since Grandpa died. That's why when I talked on the phone with her and she asked me if I had any plans, I lied to her and told her I didn't. She immediately jumped at the opportunity to politely invite me, going so far as to offer me to sleep over at her place. She said there's one room that hasn't been used in years, and I could stay in there. I immediately said yes and agreed to stay over, realizing how happy that would make her. I canceled the plans I made with my friends, telling them something else came up. Although they were bummed out about it a little, their drinking party wouldn't stop because of me. That was the last Christmas that I would ever spend with my grandma. On Christmas Eve, I arrived to my grandma's place and she greeted me like she always had, with a tight hug and lots of kisses. I barely even stepped inside when she started offering me food. She had already made what could only be described as an all-you-can-eat buffet. We dug in, and once we were done, she showed me where I could sleep for the night. It was a cozy little bedroom, which apparently used to be my mom's room when she was little. Grandma told me not to leave my room during Christmas Eve in order to avoid disrupting Santa in his work. She said that if I really needed to use the bathroom, I could, but to be extremely quiet and not to go downstairs. On the nightstand, she left a list of things I should do before going to bed to ensure I get a good present. I decided to play along and abide by the rules. I told her I'd read it before bed and do everything necessary, and she seemed content with that. She wished me a good night and left the room. I was pretty tired from the trip there and the enormous dinner I'd eaten, so I laid down and was quickly asleep. I awoke a few hours later. I glanced at my watch and realized it was 3:01 a.m. I got up to grab a glass of water downstairs from the kitchen and groggily walked through the dark, trying to avoid any loud noise or turning on the lights not to wake Grandma. I went downstairs and turned on the kitchen light, gulping down a glass of water. I glanced toward the living room at the Christmas tree, and something caught my attention under the glow of the decoration lights. There was a small plate with a tiny paper that said, "For Santa." I reckoned it was cookies and milk, but when I got closer, I realized that the plate was empty. Red liquid was in it, and right next to the plate was a small bucket. Obviously, I found this weird, but figured that Grandma may have just forgotten to put it away or something. I turned off the kitchen lights and returned to my room, just then remembering the list my grandma gave me. I grabbed it off my nightstand and started reading. "Dear James, thank you for visiting me for Christmas. You made your grandma really happy. Now, Christmas is a little different in this house than what you're probably used to, so it's very important that you follow these rules on the list. Number 1, make sure to close your windows and ensure they are closed properly. These old windows don't work properly sometimes, so if you feel like cold air is coming in, let me know. Number 2, don't put any wood in the fireplace after 9 p.m. Santa will be really angry if it's scalding in the chimney or if there's still smoke. Number 3, you didn't forget about milk and cookies, did you? I stopped reading and chuckled at the list. Grandma clearly wanted me to follow the basic rules for Santa, like when I was a kid. But again, I decided to oblige. I continued reading the list. In this household, we don't use milk and cookies. We use raw red meat and blood. I already left a bucket by the Christmas tree, and there's a raw piece of chicken I put on the plate. Santa sure loves it. Number 4, if you're woken up by the sound of scratching or knocking on your window, ignore it. Your room's on the 2nd floor. There's no way to reach up to it. In fact, it's best not to look there. But if you see someone beckoning you, pretend they're not there. They may try to open the window from the outside. This is why it's so important to keep the windows closed. Number 5, you may hear growling coming from the kitchen. It's okay because Santa never comes upstairs, and since I already left the chicken for him, that should satisfy him. Now, by this point, I was sure Grandma was just messing with me. That was until I heard the sound of 3 gentle knocks on the window behind me. I froze in place, staring at the list, but practically staring through it. 3 more gentle knocks ensued, and I did my best not to give away that I heard them. Once again, there were 3 more knocks, and then the sound of scratching started. First gently, and then louder, as if a rat was trying to bite through the wall. It lasted for around a minute until it completely stopped. Only when it did I gather enough courage to slightly shift my position. That was a mistake, though, because when I looked down to the floor at the light which was cast in from the window, I saw the unmistakable shadow in the form of a humanoid silhouette stretched across. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like whoever was there held both hands on the window and stared directly towards me. I decided that the best thing to do was continue reading the list to try to distract myself. Number 6, if someone walked into your room while you're sleeping and you happen to wake up, pretend that you're still asleep. In the worst case scenario, the person will sit on the edge of your bed and observe you. So do your best not to let them know you're awake. If you feel their breath on your neck and it gets progressively closer, it means they realize you're awake. Number 7, you may hear me calling you from downstairs. Don't listen to it. I will under no circumstances go downstairs during the night. Number 8, the last and most important rule. If you get up to go to the bathroom, never, ever, ever turn on any lights in the house. He has trouble noticing you in the dark, but if you turn on the lights, he'll be able to follow you wherever you go, and then not even locking your door will help. Oh, I'm sorry, there is one more rule. Number 9. Follow these simple rules, and in the morning, you can open your Christmas presents. Love, Grandma. Now, the scratching and knocking had already stopped by the time I was done reading, and the shadow from the window was gone. I went to bed and covered myself over my head, shivering, and I don't mean from the cold. Sometime during the night I heard my door open, but I did my best to ignore the footsteps and low growling noise. I either passed out or fell asleep sometime later, but all I know is I woke up to the sound coming downstairs from the kitchen. I shot up, looking around the room and at the window, rubbing my temples and thinking about the nightmare I had. I left my room and immediately heard my grandma's voice calling me from downstairs to come open the presents. I told her that I was coming when I suddenly felt a grip on my wrist. I turned around and saw my grandma there, staring at me, wide-eyed. She leaned in and whispered in my ear with a trembling voice, "You turned on the lights, didn't you?" So I'm sure that you'll certainly agree that that was one creepy Christmas. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. When selling a house, if a death occurred within 3 years of the house going on the market, the seller is required to inform potential buyers of said death. This little requirement wasn't necessary in my case. Everyone within a 50-mile radius seemed to know about Victoria Teller. It was a tragic story. She'd given birth to a bouncing baby boy whose father no one seemed to know. The baby passed away just a few months later, and Victoria took her own life a year after that. That much was known to be true. What was unknown were the circumstances surrounding the incidents, how the baby died. Some said accident, some said illness, and some said murder. How Victoria killed herself, and what happened in between. The popular rumor was that Victoria, in her grief-stricken psychosis, began buying dolls to replace her dearly departed son. The doll would then suffer the same fate as the real baby in her mind, and she would bury it, move on to another. People, mostly teenagers, made it a Halloween tradition to search for the doll graveyard. They searched the backyard and the woods behind it, but nothing was found in the 6 years that the house was empty. I was confident that the house I had bought for my family and me had nothing strange in its history but 2 tragic deaths. The first few months living in the Teller house were uneventful. I had to occasionally shoo away curious locals that weren't aware that our house was no longer empty. But I found no ghosts or satanic symbols or anything of the like. It seemed that it was just a house, one that I got a huge discount on because of what had happened there, and of course the bad juju it was rumored to have acquired because of it. By the time the Christmas season rolled around, I'd pretty much forgotten about Victoria Teller. It was the first year that my son, Caleb, was really aware of anything other than presents. We lined the roof and windows with lights, hung a wreath on the door, and put some standing decorations on the lawn. We bought and decorated a tree big enough to fit a toy store underneath, which was appropriate because of how many presents Santa was going to bring Caleb that year. He was getting more excited each day, especially since we'd been dropping some pretty big hints that he was getting a puppy. My family was the happiest it had ever been until a week before Christmas. My wife had been wrapping presents as we bought them, so we didn't have to stay up all night on Christmas Eve like we had in previous years. She'd opened the door to the closet that held the presents to find the wrapping paper torn to shreds. Her first thought was that Caleb had gotten into them, but I doubted that he would have been able to contain his excitement if he had. It looked almost as if some sort of rodents had shredded the paper, but the boxes weren't damaged at all. We brushed it off as a mystery and moved the presents to the attic after rewrapping them. I occasionally heard some shuffling from inside the closet, but I never saw whatever critter had caused it. I figured I would call an exterminator after Christmas to check inside the walls. Soon, things started to get really strange. I walked into the bathroom to find the dirty clothes scattered around the room and the hamper on its side. My wife found the refrigerator door hanging open, with food torn up and thrown on the floor. Caleb was distraught one morning when he woke up to find all of the toys that he had carefully placed in his toy box the night before had been thrown all around his room while he slept. All this and the noises in the walls were getting more frequent and were heard everywhere in the house. My superstitious wife was becoming scared that the local urban legend was true, that Victoria Teller still haunted the house. She reasoned that the spirit was becoming more active because we were so happily preparing for the holiday with our son, something she never got to do. I laughed at her theory. I shouldn't have. It's Christmas Eve, and my wife and I put Caleb to bed. We had to return to his room several times to tell him that if he didn't go to sleep, Santa wouldn't bring him anything. When I was convinced that he was finally going to stay in his bedroom, I picked the puppy up from my mother's house and brought it home. We hadn't named him yet, but he was a golden retriever puppy that was as energetic as he was soft and fluffy. After playing with him for a while, we put him to bed in his crate, ate the cookies Caleb left for Santa, and turned in for the night. I was jerked from my slumber by a blood-curdling scream. My wife and I followed our son's cries for help to the living room. Caleb had snuck out of bed and found the puppy. Instead of the happy fluff ball that we had left by the tree, he found a mangled metal crate filled and surrounded by fur, blood, and chunks of discarded meat. My wife took Caleb into another room to console him, while I checked for intruders and signs of a break-in. I found nothing, so I returned to the living room and began cleaning up the mess. I was kneeling on the floor, convincing myself that there was a silver lining in the fact that we had hardwood floors instead of carpet, when I heard a tinkling noise come from the tree. I turned my head just in time to see a pair of big blue eyes staring at me from the branches. I jumped to my feet and backed up a few paces just as the first doll dropped from the tree. It was followed by 3 others. They were those delicate porcelain dolls wearing what were probably pretty dresses at one time. I couldn't tell, because the dresses were covered in dirt and blood. I watched with a mixture of terror and disbelief as all 4 dolls slowly rose from the ground and started towards me. The screams of my wife and son snapped me out of my horrified trance. The dolls' heads turned as I ran from the room to find my family. I raced up the stairs to my bedroom, where I found my wife standing on our bed with Caleb in her arms. Dozens of porcelain dolls, varying in sizes and damage and filth, were standing on the floor surrounding the bed. They were making their way towards my loved ones with their tiny arms stretched out, reaching for the woman and child who were desperately trying to stay away. I started kicking the little demons out of the way as I hurried to the rescue of my wife and child. I didn't think a bunch of fucking dolls would be so hard to push through, but I was wrong. For every one that I kicked away, 4 more came at me. They grabbed and pulled and thrashed a bit, and I found myself moving away from the bed instead of toward it. After noticing that most of the dolls had directed their attention to me, I yelled for my wife to run. I hoped that I served as enough of a distraction for the demon toys that her and Caleb could get away unharmed. The dolls that were still trying to reach them were clinging to the sides of the bed, climbing with delicate little hands. My wife jumped off of the bed, stumbled, and fell. Caleb's head hit the floor, and the resulting cries caught the attention of many of the dolls I was desperately trying to fight off and keep away. My wife tried to right herself and gather our son before the wave of small monsters got to them, but she was too slow. I watched as the dolls quickly swarmed Caleb and began tearing at his flesh. My wife started trying to get them away, but they turned on her when Caleb stopped thrashing. I made my way to them just as my wife stopped fighting. I saw the despair in her eyes as a doll with black hair and a gray tattered dress bit a chunk from her throat. The creatures moved so fast. There were so many of them, we didn't stand a chance. I don't know how long I stood in my bedroom, watching the horde of dolls ripping apart the two people I loved most in the world, before I realized that I was no longer being attacked. Every porcelain creature was crowded around what was left of my wife and son, feasting on them. I've regretted what I did next every day since. I ran. I bounded down the steps as fast as my feet would carry me. I reached the front door when I heard a woman's voice come from the second floor. "That's right, my children. Fill those bellies so you can grow big and strong." I shut the door behind me and fell down the steps of the front porch. After vomiting up cookies that I'd eaten earlier that night, I turned to look at the house. Peeking out of the window, illuminated by the colorful Christmas lights, was a gaunt woman wearing a tattered black dress. She smiled through a veil of stringy hair as a doll climbed up the front of her dress and into her arms, then closed the curtain. The soft thud of following footsteps echoed behind him as he hurried through the snowflakes toward home. It kept pace with him, quickening when he quickened and slowing when he slowed. He was creepy. His flesh crawled at the sound, and he sped up, cursing himself for walking home alone from midnight Christmas Mass. Normally not a pious man, the middle-aged bachelor had suddenly been struck by a wish to hear the old Christmas song sung once again by a church choir, and had walked across town to attend the service. Now he regretted his choice as he passed dark house after dark house in the snowy night, and the footsteps ever followed. He sped up until he was nearly running and skidded into his street. A few more paces brought him to the bottom of his front steps, and as he dashed up them, he realized suddenly that the following footsteps had ceased abruptly. He glanced behind him at the cross street from which he had just turned and saw only one pair of footprints in the snow-covered street where there should have been two. He frowned in puzzlement and then shuddered as a cold breeze struck him, driving snow against his collar, and slammed against the door. It almost seemed to pass through the door, but that was superstitious nonsense. His hand was shaking as he unlocked the front door and hurried inside. He expected darkness, but was delighted to see the yellow glow of firelight coming from his study doorway upstairs. His old housekeeper, whom he thought firmly asleep in her attic bedroom, must have lit the fire pending his return. He shrugged out of his coat and paused for a moment, amazed to find it still warm and dry, though he had walked for more than a mile through a snowstorm. It was almost as if he'd been walking in a bubble of calm air, though he remembered the soft snowflakes hitting his face when he first stepped out of church, before the mysterious footsteps began. His shudder was interrupted by a shout of greeting as his old friend Andy came hurrying out of the study. His whole face lit up in a grin at the unexpected surprise. The two men shook hands heartily and retreated back to the warmth of the firelight, talking so fast they stumbled over each other's words. Andy had left town years ago to take a government job in D.C., and they hadn't seen each other since. Nearly an hour had passed before it occurred to him that his guest might be hungry. His offer of a meal was instantly accepted, but Andy was unwilling to leave the comfort of the fire to eat in the kitchen, so he jogged downstairs alone to fetch some food. He didn't wonder at his friend's reluctance to join him in the kitchen. Andy had looked very pale, and had kept shivering with cold while they talked. He hoped his friend wasn't ailing for anything. After a few moments later, he was back with warmed-up steak and potatoes and a couple of glasses of beer, apologizing profusely as he handed Andy a plate for the mismatched dinnerware. Andy just laughed and hunkered down to eat. When they were both finished, he showed his friend to a guest room and then tumbled into his own bed to sleep, all his apprehensions caused by mysterious footsteps forgotten in the visit of his friend. He jumped out of bed Christmas morning and dashed immediately downstairs to the guest room to rouse his friend. And Andy wasn't there, and the bed had not been slept in. That was odd. He ran down to look in the study, but Andy wasn't there either, and one plate full of food was sitting on the end table beside his old friend's chair. It was completely untouched, though he'd seen Andy eating from it the night before. Skin creeping at the thought, he ran to the kitchen and asked his housekeeper if she'd seen Andy. But the housekeeper had seen no one, either the previous night or this morning. He flopped down on the bottom step of the staircase, completely baffled. Where the hell had Andy gone? It was a mystery that plagued him all Christmas Day, and he did not enjoy his holiday dinner at all, a fact that annoyed his housekeeper. He was awakened the next morning from a restless sleep by the sound of the front doorbell. He stumbled out of bed and was splashing water from the bedside pitcher onto his sleepy eyes when a knock came at his bedroom door. When he answered, his housekeeper handed him a telegram that had just arrived. As she hurried back downstairs to prepare his breakfast, he opened it curiously, not knowing who would be telegraphing him so urgently. As he read the telegram, he started to tremble. The message was short and to the point. Andy's family regretted to inform him that his old friend had passed away on Christmas Eve in his home in Washington, D.C. He sat down hard on the bed, the telegram fluttering away from his hand. He thought to himself, "It must have been Andy who followed me home on Christmas Eve. That would explain the eerie footsteps and the dry coat in the middle of the snowstorm." He'd spent Christmas Eve with a ghost. I want to tell you a story, a Christmas story as it were, but certainly not one that you're expecting to hear. It's a story about the Pricolici. And what are they? The Pricolici are Romanian werewolves of ancient lore, and they love Christmas. Well, more correctly, they love the endless, dark winter nights. They love the power of the icy full moon. And they prowl the shadowy forests and secluded pathways and trails in the hopes of catching some unsuspecting wayfarer that they can rip to pieces. Or perhaps a roving gypsy caravan that had waited too long into the season to head back east. They could be cut off, surrounded, and mutilated. Even if one or two of them chanced to possess or brandish some trinket made of silver, it wouldn't be enough to save them. One thing you need to know about the Pricolici: these werewolves are unique in that they do not perpetuate the werewolf curse by biting their victims. No. They are, in the form of wolf men, reanimated corpses of evil men who've committed violent crimes and who just can't seem to get enough of that bloodletting. And if the evil, terror, and death propagated by these monsters weren't enough, they won't stay dead. Even if you, or perhaps I, were able to have a shot strike home with a silver bullet, or land a killing blow with a silver blade, the damnable thing would rise again, only this time as a vampire. And of course, the vampire is, in the words of Montague Summers, a pariah, even among the demonic. So my friends, as you sit there on this cold December night, warming yourself by the fire and reveling in the magic of the season, visions of sugar plums notwithstanding, pause for a moment and check the palms of your hands for the sign of the pentagram. And remember that somewhere out there, lurking in the frozen dead of night, are the Yuletide werewolves.